you. What about the Enneagram 2, which for those of you who are listening and aren't as familiar, this is the type that is striving to feel connected and appreciated, loved, and wanted. What about that 2 energy really resonated with you? How did you know that you were a type 2?
It's interesting. I took the assessment after I started my coaching practice. I did not have this insight when I was working in corporate, and I really wish that I had had this earlier in my career. Um, so when I took the assessment, I realized it was spot on. I mean, every word in the report spoke to me, and I knew this is exactly who I was. There was no doubt that I was type 2, both professionally and personally. Uh, I felt I had been successful because of the traits of the type 2. Being in corporate communications, a lot of time you are supporting other people by helping them with whether it's media training, speech writing, getting them ready for a meeting, whatever it is. I've never had a problem kind of being the number 2 person um, and not being in the spotlight. And yet there were also some things that I learned, some big light bulbs that went off when I read that report about the positive attributes, but also the things that I have to watch out for.
Would you be willing to share one of those things that you maybe, and
Oh,
maybe you've grown through it, but one of those things that you've had to watch out for?
sure. There are a couple things. I think the first and the most important one for me was learning about the importance of self-care and
Mm.
setting boundaries. I guess that's two. In terms of self-care, making sure that I was tapping into my needs and figuring out what it is that I needed, whether it was to spend less time with friends and more time
Mm.
going to the gym or taking a walk or walking my dog. So that I found is really important to me. And the second thing is setting boundaries and being clear with expectations with other people and making sure that up front that I'm aligned and the other person or the other people are aligned as to what my role is going to be. Because with a type 2, we can easily get into that scope creep
Mhm.
where you're 20% responsible and all of a sudden you're 40 and you find yourself you're 100% possible responsible for this project. And I say a third one is because the 2 likes to help and seeks out opportunities to help other people, um, that you have to be careful that you're not interjecting yourself into
Mm.
somebody else's space and offering help when they really don't want help or they really don't want advice. So making sure that I keep that in perspective has been really helpful.
Okay, so I there was so last season was about the kind of a focus on entrepreneurship. And there was a woman that was also identified as a type 2, and so we had a conversation around boundaries and how she was answering emails at 11 o'clock at night, and kind of like you said, with the scope of some of her projects, she was, doing way more than what was said in the contract. I'm curious because in theory that sounds set stronger boundaries. And for some people, it's like, nope, I'm not doing that, or I'm just not going to answer it. But I know for others, that's maybe easier said than done. Would you be willing to share an example, or is there an example that comes to mind of like a boundary you have within your own business, whether it's like set working hours or just anything that comes to mind that we might be able to learn from?
Mhm. So, I think when you first start your own business, it's very natural to work before 9 o'clock and after 5 o'clock and on the weekends. It's just, at least for me, it's just part of the startup process. Then you start to realize that you can't always have your foot on the gas pedal, and at some point you have to take it off. And so I started realizing about the importance of not working evenings, not working on the weekends. And I also, in my coaching practice, I talk with my clients about setting boundaries and talk with them about getting their team to agree that after 7 o'clock, no one sends any emails.
Mm,
They use the Outlook program where they can set it up to be delivered the next morning. Um, they send text messages if there's an emergency. So I can't really talk to my clients about not sending emails after 7 o'clock and then send them something at 8
right.
p.m. So I try to walk the talk. Am I perfect? No. I blow those rules all the time, but I'm constantly aware of them. And I would say, you know, deciding how late in the day you're going to work. Are you going to work on the weekends is important.
I love the send later feature. I use it in Google. I started using it recently for that same reason because it gives me anxiety when I get like a 10 o'clock email. And I know it's just like
Right.
when you have time, especially, just if you're working multiple jobs, all kinds of things. But I was like, wow, I got to do better about this. So I love that send later. Go ahead and write it, get it off your to-do list, and then just
Yeah.
schedule it
You
for
know,
later.
I was talking to somebody about this exact topic, and we were talking about the fact that when a manager sends an email at 9 o'clock at night saying, "Don't worry about getting back to me tonight. We can cover this in the morning," that person still receives it and feels an obligation
Yes.
and is going to think about it through the night until the next morning. So just don't send any sort of communication until the next morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got others, Sarah. I've got one other quick tip around this.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
I have a client who has two little girls, and I think they were 7 and 9 at the time. And they're always complaining that when he would get home at like 6 o'clock, he would walk in the door on his phone. He'd stay on his phone. The little girls wanted to say hi and interact with them. And then right after dinner, he would be right back on his phone. So what we did was he said that he would designate 6 to 8 p.m. every night, Monday through Friday, that he would not be on his phone. He let his team know about it. It also then gave them permission not to use their phone from 6 to 8 to be present with their family. But when he walked in the door, his youngest daughter would take the phone from him, put it in the kitchen drawer, and then at 8 o'clock, the daughter would get the phone and give it back to him at 8. And that way, he's sending a message that you, my daughter, are important to me. My family is
Oh,
important to me, and I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be present from 6 to 8. So, just a little tip. It worked beautifully for that family.
I absolutely love that. And that's such a reminder. I think we can all just, hear it again. And that, sometimes we say we have priorities and things are important to them, but really it's your actions that show you what really is the priority. And we sometimes kind of get our wires crossed and kind of get things upside down. So I love that. I absolutely love that idea. Um, Something else I wanted to ask you about was so I know that you have gotten some really interesting and helpful insight about yourself. And I'm also curious about how understanding this type 2 energy about you and those things that show up have helped you in relationships with clients, teammates, at home, with friends, anything you're willing to share, would love to hear about.
Sure. Well, I'm laughing because I was being married 6 years ago, and my husband realized early on in our relationship that I'm a coach and I use assessments, and so we were talking about different styles and different types. Well, my husband is very different from me. He's not taken the formal assessment, but I believe that my husband is a 7. And so, we talked early on about kind of my energy level and how much time I wanted to spend out socializing, going to parties, entertaining, and that sort of thing. And so it kind of goes back to expectations and sort of explaining what it is that you need. I love to do that stuff, but I also know that I'm going to need time later that night or the next day to recharge my batteries. And then I'll show up and I'll be a good wife or I'll be a good stepmom. Um, so it's just this insight is applicable in really every facet of my life. And I think once you go through this and you take it, you realize the impacts. So I use this all the time, with my family. Again, I being the helper, the giver, wanting to take care of my family. I need to watch that I don't get too involved or that I don't overstep my bounds. I also know with clients and with my business that yes, I deliver a very high level of customer service, but at some point it becomes unhealthy.
Mm,
And so sometimes good is enough. There are certain
hmm.
times that I need to deliver great customer service. For the most part, good customer service is okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, yeah, what is it? Too much of a good thing can
Yeah,
be a bad thing. Like ice cream is
exactly.
amazing, but if you
Yeah.
eat, two cartons, yeah, it becomes like, hmm. Something else that I'm curious about, actually I have kind of two questions about this, but one is you had mentioned that you have been historically okay with kind of being the guide, the supporter behind the scenes, behind the throne. I think I've heard it called before too, for that type two, not necessarily being in the spotlight, but sometimes whether it's a leader in a corporation or an entrepreneur leading their own business, it does require stepping into the spotlight, which can be scary for everybody, right? But especially that too, tends just to naturally gravitate to being behind the scenes. I know you have stepped into the spotlight in different areas, leading your own company. What has that been like? Have you noticed like you really had to work on it, or has it just been more natural as your business has grown?
You know, um, it can be terrifying and it can be empowering.
Hmm.
And I would say, especially, early on, even though, I did media training and got other people ready to be in front of the camera, but that wasn't something in terms of being in front of the camera that I felt like I was super successful at. So I actually enrolled in some programs that gave me an opportunity to train, to be in front of a camera, to wind it back, to do it again, to have it critiqued and do it again. And, the more that you do this, the easier that it becomes. But there's no doubt that for, I'd say, most people, getting in front of a group, getting in front of a microphone can be really terrifying.
Hmm.
The flip side of it is that 99% of the people that do get in front of a camera or do get behind a microphone do a really good job. And other people see ourselves differently than we see ourselves. And so people are always surprised at how good they look when I'm working with somebody and rolling it back. So I think it's a matter of just giving yourself permission to step outside that safety box. Just try it, put your big toe in, then put your second toe in. And eventually you'll find that your confidence grows as you give yourself permission to just to try it.
So good. Because nobody comes out, being born being able to be a natural, and sometimes speaking comes easier, but especially like in, LinkedIn live, or, getting up in front of a room, giving a speech. I mean, there's all kinds of skills that go into that just like you said, take time and practice is the only way to get better at them.
That's right.
Um, The other question I wanted to ask you about is around leadership. And there tends to be kind of the stereotypical image of what a leader is. And on the Enneagram, I would say a lot of three energy, they tend to be pretty natural leaders, maybe sometimes eight, kind of that boss in charge, direct, bold energy. And so sometimes we can think, that's what a leader looks like. I have to be, maybe loud. I have to be okay in the spotlight. And there's all kinds of different ways to lead. I'm curious, how would you describe your leadership style? And I love what you had said. You had said earlier, you feel like you've actually been really successful in being that kind of supporting role, understanding what people need and helping them get there. And that very much, is a form of leadership. But just out of curiosity, how would you describe your leadership style?
Well, I think, one thing I want to say before I jump into my style is that any Enneagram type can be a really effective, successful leader. And it's just important to get to know yourself and your style, what your motivators are, what your stressors are, and also learn how to read other people and learn what their needs are. Learn how to, as I say, speak their language. Because what leadership comes down to is being successful and being able to get work done through other people, being able to get other people to follow you, that want to work for you, that want to help you move the project, the department, or the company forward. And so as a two, twos are, I'd say, just we're naturally gifted to be able to develop relationships with people pretty quickly and pretty easily. And I think, twos can quickly also create that safe space, that environment that makes people feel supported. I think people that have worked for me feel like I've had their back. They've also felt like I have worked hard to develop them as professionals, giving them opportunities to learn with other people or being able to share my learnings. So, before I did the Enneagram, all I knew was to show up and be myself and be the best that I could. But I think the most important thing that I did intuitively that I didn't even know was my ability to take care of the people that worked for me. They knew that I cared about them. And so I showed it in, remembering their birthday. I knew their families' names. And they knew that I wanted them to be successful.